Thanks everyone for hanging with us here on Go Local Live in the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. This is Kathy Hartley with Friends of Hearthside. I wanted to make sure I got that right. So, volunteer, and you created the organization a few years back, and we're here going to talk about Hearthside Museum's tribute to Rhode Island, the 1904 World's Fair. So cool. This is the third year you guys have done this.
This is, yeah.
Tell me just a little bit about the celebration, what's happening this weekend, July 23rd.
Oh, it's huge. For a small little museum, we have a major event taking place, and it is a tribute to the 1904 St. Louis World's Fair, which was the grandest fair of all at that time. This was the turn of the century, and it was a time of the latest inventions and technology. And we try to capture a little bit of everything on a very small scale at our museum. We can't bring in big palaces and big Ferris wheels, but we can still give people a little taste of it and learn more about Rhode Island and its role at the fair.
Yeah, so let's break it down just on kind of the simplest level. Why do this? What's the connection between Hearthside and, because the fair was held in St. Louis. Right. So what's even the connection? Why even bother?
Okay, so this is Hearthside. Okay.
Gorgeous for people who haven't been there.
It's a very unusual house. It's all stone. It sits on Great Rhode in Lincoln. And this was chosen as the model for the Rhode Island Pavilion at the St. Louis World's Fair. So that's our correct connection.
Okay. And so what was the Rhode Island Pavilion? Just so people can understand, you know, we go to fairs, we understand what pavilion, but what was the Rhode Island Pavilion?
It was sort of a home base for all the Rhode Islanders that traveled to St. Louis so that they could go and, feel at home, that they were back in Rhode Island. And it was a place for the receptions and for different exhibits to take place right in that building. Rhode Island also had exhibits in all these big palaces that were there at the fair. They had like the Palace of Electricity and the Palace of Fine Arts and so forth. And really, Rhode Island came home with an amazing number of awards.
Wow.
Grand awards and gold awards and silver awards in so many different areas. And we're really trying to bring out that history to really show everybody in Rhode Island that we were great once and we can be great again. And so we're bringing in a number of speakers and performers. And so it's an educational day, but it's also an entertainment day.
A day full of fun, and we will get to all that. My question is, did every state then have its own pavilion? Or were they were they named after their own states?
Yeah. Each of the states, and then there were like 63 nations around the world that also were represented there at the fair.
So how did they choose Hearthside to be the model? They just found it beautiful? What was
they did, except that they had a contest with architects, and there were 13 different architects that participated in this contest, and it was the firm of Thornton & Thornton who were selected as the winners for that, and they chose Hearthside because they felt it was the most beautiful colonial building to represent our state.
And just that grand magnificence of it, and the romantic of it,
right? And it was that this curved roof here that really is the distinguishing factor, and that's what you can see. This is a postcard of the Rhode Island Pavilion, so you can see the similarities of it.
Is that still standing, do you know?
It is not. There's a whole other story to that.
Oh, well, do you know it?
I do. So the whole fair was built as this fantasy city, and it was a temporary city. So they built these enormous palaces, and they only lasted for 7 months, and then the whole thing got ripped down, with the exception of a very few buildings. And the Rhode Island building was one that was not ripped down. So it was moved to another section of St. Louis, and it became a residence. And it doesn't look anything like what it did then. It's only about 2/3 the size of the building, and all of the architectural details came off of it. But back in 2013, there was a woman who had grown up in that house in St. Louis, and she decided to make a trip to Rhode Island to find the real house. And she came walking.
Oh, I'm going to cry. It's so cool.
Yeah, she came walking into Hearthside, and she said, I feel like I'm at home. This is what my home was at one time. So that started a whole connection for us back to the St. Louis World's Fair, more so than just knowing that history. It was, she could tell us the stories, and then shortly after that, she ended up donating their family's memorabilia from that fair to Hearthside, so that gave us a collection. And from that point on, we just decided we were going to do this tribute and really do something in the middle of the summer that would bring people in and families and make it a fun time.
What an amazing story. Yeah. My goodness.
And she's going to be there this weekend.
Oh!
She's coming to talk about what it was like to grow up in that house.
Oh, how cool. So you really can get kind of a first-hand account from not only the volunteers who have made this all possible and the volunteers who spend time in the museum, but then you can hear the first-hand accounts from the woman who grew up in the Pavilion.
The Rhode Island Pavilion, right. And she talks about all the different famous people that would stop by. And her dad used to put on shows and serve ice cream cones and things like, and hot dogs, because those two foods became popular at that World's Fair.
At that very World's Fair.
Yes.
So the foods that we eat at fairs today started
That
there.
was the beginning of fast foods, because one part of the fair was called the Pike, and that was the entertainment. It was a mile long of like 50 different attractions and palaces of fun, like fun houses and different rides. But people were so amazed at everything that they didn't want to waste a minute. So they would grab a hot dog and they'd grab an ice cream cone and eat it on the way, and that was the beginning of fast food.
Oh my gosh. Thank goodness, right? Because we can't waste time eating anymore.
No.
Okay, before we get to, because we kind of started getting into activities and events, but before we get totally into that, I do want to talk about some of the things that you brought. This plate is, I'm going to let you touch it because I don't want to break anything, right, Tony?
It's an artifact.
Tell me what you're holding.
Okay, this is one of the most popular souvenirs from the World's Fair. And I first want to say that Souvenirs really started at that 1904 World's Fair because they came out with all of these different products, and from that point on, whenever people would go visit a place, they would buy a souvenir.
Cool.
But it really started at the World's Fair. So this was a sandwich plate, and it had in gold leaf a symbol here of the festival hall. And you would order this at a restaurant with a cheese sandwich, a 10-cent cheese sandwich, and for an extra 10 cents you could get a beautiful plate like this to take home as a souvenir.
I love that.
So this is part of the merch collection from the people that lived in that house. This is a guidebook. That World's Fair was so large. It wasn't just large in scope, but land-wise, and it was covered over 1,200 acres. And one building alone was 23 acres.
Wow.
Under one roof.
That's
23
amazing.
acres under one roof was the Palace of Agriculture. So it would take, if you wanted to see everything, it would take 3 weeks to see the entire fair.
So for people that were going to the World's Fair, it was worth whatever the ticket price was. I'm guessing it was like,
You would have to get
5
there.
cents, 10
Most
cents?
people got there by train, and the automobile was just coming out, so very few people got to drive there. The people that did go to the fair for the first time were seeing electricity. They were seeing automobiles for the first time, so it was an amazing experience for people to go see all of this stuff.
Absolutely incredible. Yeah. So as people are coming to celebrate all these firsts at the 1904 World's Fair, what can people expect to see at the celebration at Hearthside?
Okay, well, you'll be greeted by a big arch, just like the St. Louis Arch, and you'll hear all the sounds of a fair, the sort of the carousel music and the arcade games playing. It'll be old-fashioned, though. Everything is old-fashioned, so what you would have seen back in 1904. We have a tent with entertainment of magic shows, belly dancing. We have the Eastern Medicine Singers, which is the Native American group. We also have the Confucius Institute from Bryant doing the dragon dance, so they'll be doing that all through the audience and on stage. We also have another tent with lectures going on. So you'll learn more about, we're going to do a demonstration on a substance called staff. And staff was what was used to make all of these sculptures all over the World's Fair. There were over 1,000 sculptures that they had to make in 2 years' time. Wow. And they were all going to be only lasting for 7 months. And the statues were enormous. But we have a sculptor who's actually using the original formula of this staff, who's going to be making sculpture and showing how that's done.
Oh.
We also have watercolor artists on the grounds that'll be painting. We have brass music going on, ice cream cones and hot dogs.
Of course.
We also have a neat little show, Jim Key, the educated horse, or the world's most beautiful horse. And this was a true story that Jim Key was at the World's Fair, and he could spell, and he could write, and he could do math, and he could answer any question from the audience. And so we don't have a real horse, but we have a neat little horse puppet that will demonstrate exactly what Jim Key did. And Jim Key even made an appearance in Rhode Island back in 1907. And he came to Crescent Park, and he did a show here, so.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love this all. So I hope
So-
you will come back and continue to keep us updated on all
Mhm.
things Hearthside and the history. But the celebration is July
Yep.
23rd,
Yep.
and so we have a whole big article on Go Local Prov as well if you want some more
Mhm.
information. So Kathy, thank you so much for joining
Okay,
us today.
thank
This has
you.
been great.
Thank you.
And if you want any more information, you can go check out their website as well. Thank you so much for coming in.
Okay,
And
thank
we're
you.
all going to celebrate the World's Fair 1904 on July 23rd. Thanks so much
Okay.
for joining us.